Greetings, greetings, wherever you are situated in the world. My name is Dr. Kaya Niambi Shivers, and welcome to Arc Republic News Podcast. I am sitting here again with international relations analyst and political scientist, Dr. Sharice Janae. How you doing, Dr. Sharice Janae?
I'm good, girl. I'm good, girl. The world's crazy as usual, but
Yeah, exactly. And so now it needs our perspective, right? To put it into context. So our Public News podcast is dedicated to us really getting into the sinew of issues that we believe a lot of other news organizations do not get into. We're just simply adding to the gumbo pot, as my mother would say. So the first thing we want to talk about is former U.S. President Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. This week, last week actually, he was charged with he was convicted on all 34 charges in the state of New York in a hush money trial. In which he falsified business records in paying off a sex worker, Stormy Daniels. He now becomes the first former American president convicted of felony charges. He will be scheduled to sentence on July 11th. What are your initial thoughts about this trial? Did you see this coming? The sentence?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Because Alvin, who was the prosecutor who brought this case, was meticulous, right? And what I think people don't understand is that this trial was put on hold while he was president. So this act happened before he was president in 16. And it happened, and then the crime, in many ways, the payback to Michael Cohen for uh, for this hush money was paid back while he was president. So Daniels was very Alvin Daniels was very meticulous in bringing the right counts. Was very meticulous in ensuring that the counts were directly connected to each other, right? So that they weren't, and I don't want to get into the nuance of the counts, but that they weren't separated. So that if you found someone to be guilty on this count, let's say just randomly count number one, then that means count 1 through 13, you could then be seen as violating or to be convicted of because the nature of count number one, right? And so the way he brought the counts, I wasn't surprised in many ways because of what the jury did, right? Or even the idea of the use of Michael Cohen as trying to paint Michael Cohen as unbelievable, right? Well, Michael Cohen lied on the behalf of Trump, right? The idea that Michael Cohen was a liar and that was what they were going to use to substantiate why his testimony shouldn't be used, to me was a home run, because everyone has seen Trump lie repetitively, and we've also seen Trump hang folks out to dry that no longer serve him, right? So it made Michael Cohen in many ways to me more believable. And then Alvin Daniels, and for folks, for many people, using Michael Cohen as the key witness or the star witness, right, where was seen in many legal circles as risky, right? But then by using the owner of the Inquirer, right, to corroborate a lot of the stories that Michael Cohen told, I think is what ended up in the conviction. So what I really think, though, Kaya, is that that many people are not that are not talking about or thinking about is the idea that we know Trump is going to go for an appeal, right? We know that that is his mantra, that is his playbook. But the issue of Trump then going to appeal is that the appellate court or the appellate judges that he has to face are all Black women, right? And so I think that, to me, is the catch-all on all of this, that his first conviction, although it wasn't criminal, it was civil, was delved out by Letitia James, a Black woman in New York, right? His criminal conviction has been doled out by a Black man in Alvin Daniels in New York, right? And then if he pushes this on appeal, then the appellate court that he's going to have to look at is a group of Black women from the state of New York.
Mm. Well, you know what? We're gonna ride Representative Crockett's energy on that, and I would I will be looking to see exactly how that unfolds. Several things. You were talking about District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who has agreed to
Oh,
testify. No, isn't it Alvin Bragg, right? Yeah. Alvin Bragg, who has agreed to testify before Congress, but after the July 11th sentencing of Donald Trump. But I wanted to talk about this appeal. I was listening to the Native podcast with Gillum, Angela Rye, and Tiffany Cross, and they were talking. It was a really interesting conversation. And I also want to, kind of talk back to, those who are in this space as well. And they were speaking about the possibility of a pardon, or if there was a pardon, and they were asking, would Biden give Donald Trump a pardon? Do you think Biden would give Donald Trump a pardon? President?
absolutely, absolutely not.
Really?
Um, so let's step this out first. I do not believe that Trump is going to do jail time, because if he is sentenced to jail time, it will then provide fodder, right, for those MAGA extremists who believe, he can't do any wrong. So I don't think that they're going to physically lock him up, because then they would then paint themselves as a third world dictator. It would in many ways give teeth to that narrative. But I do think they're going to put him on house arrest.
Mm-hmm.
I do think they're going to put him on house arrest, and I think that then plays into the pardon or not the pardon, if that makes any sense. Is that in the justice systems, in the way that it's been crafted, there is this distrust and mistrust of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that Joe Biden believes that this moment is bigger than him.
Mm-hmm.
And because this is a historic event, right? This is the first time we've ever had a president, a former president, then convicted, become a felon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if that pardon then is extended, then it then puts an entire question on the judicial system, or it continues this mistrust or distrust of the system that I don't think that Biden is committed to, because I believe that he understands that he's in this spot as old as he is, with all the wisdom that he has from all the mistakes that he's made earlier in his political career, to ensure that at this moment, the democracy that we say we love doesn't fall apart.
So you brought up a very interesting point, and I want to, before I say the point, because I'm Black, I'm gonna tell a story real quick. But I interviewed Johnny Cochran, the lawyer, who's famous for being on the defense team of O.J. Simpson. One, let me say this: when I asked him, was the Simpson case like his signature trial, he said no. He said that for the record, it wasn't. It was actually him serving pro bono for 27 years for Geronimo G. Jaga Pratt, who was a member of the Black Panther Party, and getting him out. That was his earmark. I interviewed him for 2 days in his house in Los Angeles, and it was then he talked about, he found out in the Geronimo G. Jaga Pratt just how deep surveillance goes, because he didn't know that he was being surveilled, and his office was wired, and so on and so forth. So he was ushered in to COINTELPRO unbeknownst to him. But what he learned about the O.J. Simpson case, and this is what is going to apply to what I'm about to say with the Trump case, is that money is a factor in how trials are played out. And essentially what you said is that a decision regarding the sentencing of Trump will be determined not based on the severity of his crimes, but more of the political climate that it will cause. These are things that are only afforded to people of privilege and means, because this was a regular person, definitely a Black, brown person, sentencing would have been on that day, more so than likely. Or they would have said, you have 2 weeks or 2 months to get your affairs together. Go ahead and do that party, party that you do before you get locked up. It's a wrap for you. So I'm saying that because I want to ask a question: does this move? You said that um, um, the decision has to kind of consider, or will consider, the Trump loyalist, right? But how does this leave a bad taste or sour taste in people who say, if you did, what you did the crime, you need to do the time. Right? These very hard lines that people take or judges take on Black folk.
Right. And to your very point, right? We just had Marion Mosley, right, up there in Maryland, who took out her own money, right? Who took out her own money at her own 401k. They said she wasn't as in desperate straits as she was, all of basically very things that were very subjective.
There were
right?
other people who did the exact same thing she did in Baltimore during the pandemic. Yes.
I mean, did the exact same thing she did. It wasn't like she took her own money out of her own 401k to buy a property in a state that was open while her state that she was operating in was closed, right? Like it's laughable, right? That she would be brought on these charges and that these charges would stick. But what did they give her, right? They gave her house arrest or time, and they gave her some time served and then house arrest and then a long probation period. And so what I present her to say that I present her to say that having privilege or having privilege in the system is always going to have a role and an effect. The problem is that when it only has that a role and that effect for people that don't look like us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because although they're giving her house arrest and time served, the charges should have never been brought against her to begin with. Many legal experts agree to that. The same way many people believe that these charges against Trump should have been brought against him while he was president of the United States versus waiting this time when he was no longer in office, right? There are also people that would say that the reason that the charges weren't brought is because of presidential immunity, right? Is that this understanding that to be president of the United States, you cannot then be worried about the potential the potential state ramification of cases while you're trying to uphold the Constitution. And so the reason I guess I'm getting into these kind of nuances is that this would be to me far more black and white if we're talking about a federal case. We are not talking about a federal case. We're talking about state cases in the case of Maryland and in the case of New York. And if the federal government comes in and then in many ways tells the states what they need to do as far as sentencing, we're in a bigger problem when it comes to the constitutional balance of states' rights versus federal rights. So that's, I think, the first thing that people have to keep in front of mind when we have this conversation is that there are different echelons of power that have to then be courted regardless of the privilege of the person based upon the system. So the system in itself, from a federalist perspective, says that the states deal with crimes that are committed at the state level, the feds deal with crimes that are committed at the federal level. Right. So that's, I think, number one. And this crime was committed at the state level. That's, I think, number one. Number two, because there is a federal election that's happening, we now have to balance then this state power against this federal power. Right. And the state has the opportunity to do whatever it wants. It could lock them up and put them in the prison, but it's going to be a state prison. Right. The state gets to make this decision. And I guess what I'm saying here is that we have to remember in this dichotomy that the state is also going to be considering what are the federal ramifications, right? Because he's in this federal election. And I think that is what the conversation should be more around versus this simplistic understanding of you got locked up, you should do the time. Yeah, but the person making the decision about what time you should serve is the state, not the feds. It's unfortunate that you are now also running for a federal election that then the feds are going to have to then suss out or deal with, but all voting, no matter if it's at the state level or the federal level, starts at the state level. So it's really a state's issue problem that we have to then lean in and wait to see what New York is going to do about this, if that makes sense.
Right. No. Yeah. Yes. And I think a lot of people need to understand like these differences that are going on. I think a lot of people thought that it was federal and there's some type of federal jurisdiction over it. But
the only federal case right now that's on the docket for Trump. Even the Fannie Willis, right, was
Right.
again
State
another
one. Yeah.
state case, right?
Yeah.
The only federal case is the case before him based upon January 6th
Yes.
that Judge Chuckton in the DC Superior Court, that circuit court, that circuit court, it and people, if people don't understand circuits, there across the United States, there are state courts and then there are federal courts, and the federal courts are organized into circuits. The DC Superior Court doesn't have a circuit because they're not technically a state, so they have their own circuit. So I just want to put that there. So that's the only place he has a federal case, right? And I think that's getting confused in the mixture of all, because he has so many cases open, but he
Right.
has cases across the state, and he only has really one federal case, and that's for January 6th, right? To see if and that is really about, is he criminally responsible for inciting the insurrection?
Yes. Yes. So he has so he has to go on trial in Georgia and in Washington D.C. Um, uh, um, so I wanted to ask, and I know this has been a conversation, and I have time. We have time for a couple of more questions on this matter, but I want to just continue this. Now, Trump has, said, the way that he has been treated by. Well, let me just say this: the irony of what has happened with Trump asking for mercy after what he did to those 5 boys, right, who were not guilty. Okay, so let's always put that out there about what he did, and stands by still about these young men.
About
We
the Central Park Five, right? And
Yes,
let's
yes,
remember one
the
of those,
exonerated 5. Yes, yes,
yeah, the exonerated five, right? If we
right.
think about the exonerated five, we also have to remember that one of these exonerated five is now serving in local office. I think he
The
is on the
count.
city council, right?
Yes,
He's in city council in New York. So that is why, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is why we have to then that there has to be considerations, right? There has to be consideration for how this is dealt with, because there is that level of separated power. Because if we don't put that in the front of mind from an analytic perspective,
mhm,
what we then do is we invalidate in many ways the power and the power and the authority that this exonerated Black man has on the city council, if we're not clear about the delineation of power and how it is separated. Because if that is the case, right, then if we champion the federal government to get involved in how Trump is sentenced or forcing him to
mhm.
be locked up or any of these things, what we are setting the groundwork for is to ensure that this Black man who's a part of this exonerated five, who is now holds his own set of power on the city council, we can set up a precedent where his power is muted or severely reduced because of what we're advocating for the federal government to do to Trump to lock him up. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
That
no,
we can erode that for even for him.
right. I would. There's so much. So that's the legal lens. Another lens, another part of the legal lens is that let the law work the way that the law should work. If we are saying that, how do I want to frame this? If we have a critique against the system and how the system has been unequal when it comes to how it handles people, let it properly handle this case. But on a spiritual level, isn't this kismet, right? Isn't this karma, a Black woman with braids? um, or so what I'm, so for those like Trump being found convicted in the same location that he attempted to convict 5 young minors, Black male minors, when they weren't even guilty, right? So I don't know if people are really kind of understanding just how strong that is, and what does that mean,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So as first lady, right, because my husband's a Baptist preacher, I when I saw I watched each count be read out, right, on CBS. No, I think it was ABC News. I watched each count and I looked over to my husband. I said, and God will not be mocked. The Bible says that God will not be mocked. In the same vineyard that you sowed, in the same vineyard that you sowed this hate, in the same vineyard that you try to accuse, in the same vineyard that you did that, you sowed that, you had to reap 34 counts. You had to reap 34. I said, God will not be mocked. I said, it doesn't, I said, the earth is the Lord. God won't be mocked. Keep playing. Keep thinking that you're getting away with stuff. And it don't work like that. You can go but so long and it'll catch you.
And we're talking about, it's Councilman Yusef Salam, who is the councilman from the exonerated five that is serving. I think he did like some tweet when it came. It was like the irony, or that's what you get. I forgot the exact thing, but yeah. So now let's see how this person begs in terms of him, Donald Trump, in terms of him attempting to get an appeals. But I wanted to wrap this up, and I wanted to wrap this up with this. People have been talking about it, but I really want to get your perspective about how Donald Trump is framing what is happening to him as if he was considered a Black person, as if, and using that in a way to pull in or harness more Black vote or Black sympathy in terms of his conviction. Let's talk about the danger of that. Well, that's how I see it. I see it as a danger. I don't know what you think.
I see it as a danger, but let me say it to you this way. Black folks are not that gullible. I think that we are, and I'm not saying it's not dangerous. Please, I want people to hear that I do see that as dangerous. I understand that it's dangerous. But if we look at the trends of voting amongst Black men who are the most attracted to this message, the trends as far as voting for a Donald Trump has not ticked up as much as we are prognosticating, right? We're maybe looking at a 2% or 3% swing. Now, the reason it's before us as important is because the race is so tight that 2 or 3% may swing this thing, right? But let's remember that even when Donald Trump won and became president of these United States, he did not win the popular vote. He only won by being able to amass the 270 needed from the Electoral College. So this, in many ways, the internet has made us believe that that Donald Trump is more popular than he is. It has made us believe that he is more effective in Black communities than he actually is. Our fight in the Black community is not to stop Black men or Black people from voting for Donald Trump. Our fight in the Black community, as far as is pure engagement and getting people to care all the way around. It's not about discouraging them from supporting Trump, because most of them think it's laughable. Most of them that are in any ways engaged or tapped in believe that this understanding of selling gold tennis shoes and saying I got a rap sheet makes you Black or makes you akin to our experience is laughable for most Black Americans.
But let me say that there's I want to add to this. Even though Donald Trump's example is extreme, he is part of a continuum of white politicians or white people vying for office who use Black aesthetic or what they think is Black culture as an entry point in getting Black votes on Republican and Democratic side, right? You remember, well, back in the day, you were just a little jit, right? As we say, when Bill Clinton ran for office and he played the saxophone, and yes. And so Sister Souljah, said, this is him playing the saxophone and holding a Black baby is not going to get the Black vote. Then you speed it up, right? And people were talking about Hillary Clinton with the hot sauce in her purse, even though apparently it was known that she always carried hot sauce, right? But these things, these very simplistic or very minute things that really don't have any relevance in terms of what we're talking about electoral politics, then be these, how do I want to say it? These validations of, oh, I get you, Black people, thus you vote for me. So I want to point that out. That is just Trump doing what a lot of white politicians and Black politicians do anyway, right? And then secondly, let me say this, and this is, most of the Black men I've been in conversation with who leaned to a Trump in the first election, in this election. A lot of it is economic based, that they feel that what he does from an economic perspective, they agree with more than Biden. And there and a lot of this is informed through hip hop. Let me call out hip hop. A lot of people don't want to call out hip hop because Donald Trump was celebrated in this pop culture space of hip hop and just pop culture in general. But him having money, for a long time and still today, this capitalistic idea or framework of success being centered around how much money you have is why he was thrust as being quote unquote the man in this Black masculine space. Have to bring that up. And then thirdly, I want to point out for me what I think the danger of that is and him doing that, because I think he does that not even to get votes. I think he does it because it's like a performative, a theatrical performance. It also is part of this whole thing of how white people use the term "this is slavery" when they feel like their rights are being challenged. And comparing that experience that we had, to this form of what they considered pseudo peonage or whatever it is. So I wanted to also point that out too when we're talking about what is this Donald Trump and what he does. And then even though we know, you and I, that this is what he's doing is hogwash or pandering, there are a lot of younger folk that I don't know who know that this is what is being done, right? Or people who might understand it, but have been convinced that nonetheless he is still the better candidate. And this is not me saying that Biden is the better candidate, but they will choose and select him regardless of what is said about him. Even if it's not only is it against their interests, but it is a total slap in the face and complete disrespect of who they are as Black people in America.
I'll say this. Symbols are powerful. And in politics, there is oftentimes an overinvestment in symbols. And that overinvestment in symbols happens when there's no substance. And the reason that, to your point, that a Bill Clinton playing of the saxophone remains a symbol and doesn't get overblown is because regardless if you agreed with his substance or not, there was substance. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He had in many ways reformed the state of Arkansas where he was from as governor, right? If you think about Hillary Clinton, there's substance, whether you like the substance or not, right? Secretary of State, First Lady, Senator, there's a record, there's substance. When it comes to Trump, there's very little substance. And because there's little substance, the symbols become nauseating because the substance that's there is so minimal that the only thing that can be latched on to is symbols. And so the question for me, when we have this discussion about Donald Trump pandering the same way that politicians have pandered before, is the question of, do we have the citizenry that's strong enough to dig into the substance? Because if you're able to stay strong enough to dig into the substance and don't get caught into the fact that clicks equal bricks, then you're better off at making an informed decision and coming out on whatever side or decision that you're going to make about engaging the political system if you don't allow the symbols to suffocate you.
All right, that's a word. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharice Janae.
Thank you for tuning into Arc Republic's news podcast. We are a small media organization with big news energy and cover topics from a global lens and work to uncover rich and robust stories. Any contribution towards our operation will fuel a much needed media revolution. So how can you do that? You can send money to our fundraising platform, which is arc-republic.fundjournalism.org/donate, or Cash App us at $ARC Republic Media, and stay tuned for ARC Republic News.